You may have questions about the proposed Interstate 5 bridge replacement project. At the Just Crossing Alliance, we have questions as well, and we have important answers for you to consider. Hi, I'm Joe Courtwright. I work with the Just Crossing Alliance, and this presentation reveals some of the key issues that haven't been adequately explained about this major project. We're concerned that it's unnecessarily oversized, that its traffic work is based on outdated data, it is financially risky to the states of Oregon and Washington, and it poses a significant dilemma in how it will be paid for with tolls. It also will have inequitable impacts on the region, fails to meet our climate goals. We could do much better. We could build a right-sized project that would be affordable and that would be green. It's important to start by recognizing that what's called the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project is really something very different. It isn't just a bridge replacement. It's vastly larger. It's a 5-mile-long, 12-lane wide freeway widening project that will require $5 round-trip tolls in order to pay for and will cost the region $5 billion. It's truly massive. It's not just simply replacing the existing bridges. It's really much more than a bridge. Most of the cost of the project is rebuilding the freeway for miles north and south of the Columbia River. Cost estimates prepared for the project, for the original project, the Columbia River Crossing, showed that less than a third of the cost of the project was actually building the structure over the river. Most of the cost of the project is rebuilding freeways and interchanges north and south of the river. And in fact, while the project claims that they're only adding a lane in each direction, it's actually building a much wider structure than that. Back in the day of the Columbia River Crossing, we were told that it would be merely a 10-lane structure. But when we obtained, by a public records request, the actual plans for the structure, it turned out they were designed to be 180 feet wide, which was more than wide enough to accommodate 12 full lanes of traffic. And the current project is proposed to be at least 164 feet wide, which is also wide enough for 10 or 12 traffic lanes. So it is not simply a replacement of the bridge, it doubles the capacity, the auto-carrying capacity of the bridge. Moreover, the justification for the project is based on outdated traffic modeling. For the Columbia River Crossing, the two state departments of transportation projected how much traffic there would be in the future. And for the most part, the IBR has relied on traffic projections that were originally based on 2005 data. And those traffic projections and the methodology that they used, we know has turned out to be wrong. This chart shows exactly what was projected in 2005 for the growth of traffic across the I-5 bridges. The blue line shows what would happen, according to the CRC and two state DOTs, in terms of the number of vehicles crossing the bridge, if nothing were done. They estimated that traffic would rise from about 125,000 vehicles per day to more than 180,000 vehicles per day. That actually never happened. In fact, we know that traffic growth was much slower than that. The black line at the bottom of the chart shows that right up to the eve of the COVID pandemic, traffic growth was very much more subdued. In fact, it was about 0.3% per year, about 1/6 the level of the projection. And that's before the COVID pandemic pushed traffic levels even lower. Not only that, but all of the traffic forecasts that were prepared for the Columbia River Crossing were wrong. They overestimated the amount of overall traffic growth. They predicted that truck traffic on the bridge would more than double, and in fact, truck traffic declined by 20% and remains 20% below 2006 levels. They also said that bus travel times would increase by 18 minutes. That's not true. Bus travel times have barely budged upward in that period of time. The problem is the set of models the highway departments use systematically exaggerate future traffic growth and enable them to justify wider freeways than we really need. And that creates a financial problem for us. And the financial problem is that this wider, massive freeway project is extremely expensive. According to the project's own estimates, which are really just warmed over versions of the estimates prepared for the Columbia River Crossing, the bridge and freeway widening could cost as much as $4.8 billion. but we know the actual cost could be considerably higher. And importantly, the states of Oregon and Washington, once they commit to this project, will be legally obligated to pay the full cost of the project, regardless of how much it costs and regardless of how little money is raised from other sources, including the federal government and tolling revenues. We've taken a close look at the financial projections for the project, and so far there's a huge gap, an unexplained gap between the cost of the project, which could be $5 billion and likely more, and the amount of revenue that's been identified for it. And that gap is on the order of billions of dollars. Before we embark on this project, we should know how much it will cost, and we simply don't. And we should know where the money is coming from. But moreover, we can be virtually certain that the cost of the project will rise substantially. Every major Oregon Department of Transportation project has experienced enormous cost overruns in the past 2 decades. This is a partial list of those projects that includes the Pioneer Mountain Eddyville project between Newport and Corvallis that was supposed to cost a little over $100 million and ended up costing almost $400 million. The Grand Avenue Viaduct in Portland, more than double its original price, as is the Newburgh-Dundee bypass, which is still only partially completed. And most alarmingly, the latest project, mega project that the state moved forward, is the I-5 Rose Quarter Freeway widening project. The ODOT told the legislature in 2017 the project would cost $450 million. The latest estimates from ODOT say it could cost as much as $1.45 billion, more than triple the price that we were told just 5 years ago. So we can be virtually certain that the I-5 bridge project will cost vastly more than the outdated estimates that we have now. And there's an additional problem in the financial realm, which is that this project will have to be paid for by tolls, but tolls will undermine the justification for the project. This is what we call the tolling dilemma. And the project officials have told us that they need tolls to raise enough money to come up with at least that $5 billion that they've talked about. But we also know from experience here and around the country that when you put a toll on a roadway, fewer people tend to use it, which means that there'll be less traffic, which means there really isn't the need for a wider structure over the Columbia River. The finance plan so far outlined for the project, which is still vague, counts on it as much as a third of the price of the project being paid for by tolling revenue. And Oregon Transportation Commission Bob Van Brockland said a couple of months ago that we don't have the resources to build any of the projects that are proposed, including the IBR, without implementing tolling. So tolling is a certainty. What's less certain is how much money and traffic will be generated over a tolled bridge. We know from the experience of Louisville, Kentucky, which built a project very similar to this, doubling the width of the I-65 bridge across the Ohio River, that once they tolled the bridge, traffic on the bridge fell by almost 50%. And they charged tolls that were very modest, between $1 and $2 for each crossing. The point is, when you toll a bridge, people change their behavior and use it less often. As a result, if we were to toll this new I-5 bridge, it's very likely that it would displace a lot of traffic elsewhere in the region. And studies that were done for the Oregon Department of Transportation a decade ago by their financial consultants predicted that tolling I-5 would produce gridlock on I-205 as people sought to avoid those tolls. So essentially what we would do is spend several $1 billion to widen a bridge that far fewer people would use, and meanwhile it would produce traffic gridlock on I-205. So essentially the only way these projects will work is if both bridges are tolled, which is something that the 2 state departments of transportation have not been forthcoming about. Moreover, we're missing really key information about tolling and how it will work. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Project has pushed off to the future a serious analysis of how tolling affects traffic and how much revenue it will raise. They have just released their first traffic projections, which are incomplete and appear to suffer from the same methodological biases as previous ones. And they have no plans to do independent or realistic tolling forecasts for the next couple of years. And importantly, they're putting off doing what's called an investment grade analysis until 2024 or 2025. And the investment grade analysis is what the federal government and private lenders will require in order to issue toll bonds for the project, because those authorities know that they can't trust the estimates from state departments of transportation. And the reason we need an investment grade analysis is when outside experts look at projects like this, they come up with very different estimates of how many people will use them and how much revenue they'll produce, and importantly, what level the tolls will have to be. We know from the work on the Columbia River crossing that the work done by the two state DOTs estimated that the new bridge would carry 180,000 vehicles per day and need a toll of just $1.34. But the investment grade analysis that was done shortly afterward said that a tolled bridge would carry fewer than 100,000 cars a day, far less than it does today, and that the toll level would have to be a minimum of $2.60. So the investment grade analysis basically halved the number of expected users from the bridge and doubled the minimum toll that people would have to pay. And clearly, if that's what we're likely to face, we should know that information before we make a commitment to a project of this scale. And there's really no reason to put off an investment grade analysis. It has to be done anyhow at some point, and the two states know that. The investment grade analysis doesn't get stale quickly, and in any event could be quickly updated once prepared. But state decision makers, particularly Oregon and Washington legislators, who will be assuming full fiscal liability for this project, should have that investment grade analysis before they're asked to commit state resources to the project. It's worth asking who benefits and who loses from this project. And clearly, the cost of this will be substantial, and they'll be borne by Oregon and Washington taxpayers and the people who have to pay tolls on the bridge. But we know that making it easier to drive from Clark County to Oregon and to jobs in Oregon will benefit certain residents of the region much more than others. And it will have significant impacts on the people that are located near the widened roadway. That's what we'll talk about next. The IBR project has made a significant point, claiming that the Clark County is far more diverse economically, racially, and ethnically than it was in the past, which is certainly true. The entire United States is definitely more ethnically and racially diverse than it was in the past. But it's still the case that Clark County is overwhelmingly less diverse than the rest of the region. And that's particularly true of the people who commute at the rush hour in cars over the two bridges from Clark County, Washington to Oregon. And we use census data to look at the income, race, and ethnicity of those peak hour commuters. And what that data shows is that the average income of people driving from Washington State to jobs in Oregon is $106,000 a year. And 86% of those commuters are non-Hispanic whites. So the beneficiaries of this project, the beneficiaries of additional peak hour car capacity across the river, are overwhelmingly white and higher income households. But the project has negative impacts as well. It has significant impacts on the people located near the widened roadway. One of those places is on Hayden Island, where the roadway would be elevated about 50 feet in the air and cut across the island and be considerably wider than it is today, essentially bisecting the island. So what we'll have on Hayden Island is an elevated freeway and a lot more traffic that will make Hayden Island a less desirable place to live. Similarly, the project will have major impacts on downtown Vancouver. And the IBR project has been very reticent to release any computer renderings showing what the project will actually look like to people on the ground, either on Hayden Island or particularly in Vancouver. The top drawing shows what the Columbia River crossing would have looked like, which is actually a lower version of what's being proposed today. The bottom version is this bird's eye view that kind of makes the bridge look very small. But in fact, we know the bridge will have to clear the river by at least 116 feet, which means when it crosses the river bank in Vancouver, it'll essentially be 10 stories in the air, and it will dominate the skyline. It will be basically as tall as the tallest buildings in downtown Vancouver, and the width of the project will be roughly the equivalent of 3 Markham bridges side by side. So this is a substantial change to the skyline, the livability of downtown Vancouver. And the height of the bridge will require, again, enormous elevated ramps across much of Vancouver in order to get traffic from ground level north of the project, near the Vancouver Public Library, to the more than 116-foot elevation of the bridge itself. Now, a lot of claims are made about the project being needed for safety, but it turns out that the I-5 bridges are not particularly, and their approaches are not particularly dangerous locations. They have lower crash rates than the other major freeway bridges in the region. The Markham Bridge, Fremont Bridge, and the Abernathy I-205 bridge in Oregon City all have considerably higher crash rates. But that's actually a bit of a diversion, because the real dangerous roads that are operated by the Oregon Department of Transportation are not freeways. They're the major arterials and boulevards like 82nd Avenue, Powell Boulevard, and Barber Boulevard, which are much more accident prone, much more crash prone, and produce far more fatalities, and for which there are essentially no plans to eliminate the safety issues there. And we also know that widening freeways doesn't actually reduce the number of crashes. We know that because about a decade ago, the Oregon Department of Transportation actually widened a stretch of I-5 near Lombard. And after they widened the freeway in that stretch, the number of crashes was higher than it was before. So widening freeways, while it meets some engineers' desires, doesn't statistically turn out to produce fewer crashes. The other problem we know about this project is it is completely inconsistent with our climate goals. Last summer, we experienced the highest temperatures ever recorded in Oregon, 117 degrees. And we're clearly failing to meet our climate goals. And the principal reason is because of the increase in driving. Transportation and automobiles are the single largest source of greenhouse gases in Portland, and we really need to reduce vehicle miles traveled if we're going to do anything to reduce greenhouse gases and climate change. And we know that adding roadway capacity increases driving. And we're failing to meet those climate goals. Our transportation greenhouse gases are up almost 20% in the past 5 years. And instead of reducing greenhouse gases, which is what our transportation plans call for, they've actually increased over the last 5 years. So we're not merely not making enough progress, we're going rapidly in the wrong direction. And building more roadway capacity makes that happen even faster. Now, we also know that the scientific evidence on the principle of induced demand means that when you add additional roadway capacity, it tends to encourage people to drive more. And that's been shown to be substantial through the University of California at Davis's induced travel calculator, the results of which are shown here. And while there are a lot of other things that we can do to address climate change, particularly electrifying transit, it's not enough by itself to make substantial progress. ODOT estimates that only about 2 to 3% of Oregon cars will be electrified by 2030, and electrification is simply not significant enough or happening fast enough to address our climate problems. So what should we be doing instead? Instead of a giant project that is really a 5-mile long freeway, and the expensive part is not the bridge itself, but all the expanded approaches and rebuilt intersections, what we should be doing is looking at a more cost-effective, more environmentally friendly alternative that could address the real problems here. The first thing we should do from a financial standpoint is do the investment grade analysis. So we know how much money tolling would provide and how big a project we can afford and how big a project there'll be demand for. So we don't end up building a project with capacity we don't need. There are also some things we could do to improve traffic flow right now. We could build an arterial connection so that people who live on Hayden Island wouldn't have to get on and off the freeway in order to travel to and from the rest of Portland. We could do things to close the Jansen Beach on-ramps at the peak hour to improve flow across the bridge so that traffic doesn't back up from people getting on the bridge on a very short substandard on-ramp. We could implement congestion pricing right away, that tolling, in order to reduce the amount of traffic on the bridge and to show us conclusively how much revenue tolling will provide. By right-sizing the bridge, particularly by going to a lower level bridge, and its approaches, we could dramatically reduce the cost of the project. We wouldn't need to elevate the freeway either in Vancouver or on Hayden Island. which would dramatically reduce its cost, and we wouldn't need to rebuild intersections. There are other options for the crossing, including a tunnel and a mid-level bridge with a lift that would enable us to have that much less expensive option. And the other thing we can do is do a lot more to improve pedestrian transit and local access in the area. That would be affordable, it would be faster acting, it would be greener, and it makes more sense. And we really need to do an evaluation of alternatives. And that's the problem with the approach taken by the two state departments of transportation, is essentially with limited analysis, they've ruled out anything other than building this giant project. And that's just wrong. The National Environmental Policy Act requires you to take a hard look at alternatives so that we know what our choices are, and they're simply not doing that. So what we need to be doing as we move forward is take a hard look at this project. $5 billion and probably $7 or $8 billion would make this the most expensive infrastructure project in the region's history. Rather than simply engage in a historically based, out-of-date approach with a massive freeway widening, we could choose something different. We could choose to build something that's right-sized, efficient, and affordable that supports the goals of this region well into the future. Thanks for your time.